It is a dark night in the heart of a chaotic city. An armed force relentlessly pursues a white sedan. A woman with cold green eyes fires back without hesitation. Glass shatters, and blood spills onto the asphalt. Inside the car, she and the wounded man fight desperately. Bullets fly and engines roar. They know that tonight is only the beginning of a greater war. The white car speeds through the dark night. The woman screams, "James, get out!" as she grabs the gun from the wounded man's hand. Brutal shots erupt from inside the car. Bullets fly and the roof shakes. James rises with half his body out the window and fires back fiercely. Bullets hit the pursuing car. The engine explodes and smoke billows out. They won't give up tonight. James shoots fiercely from the roof of the white car and yells at the woman to get inside before she is killed. Bullets rain down on the pursuing truck. Tires burst and the engine explodes. The truck swerves, crashes, and bursts into flames. Explosion after explosion occurs, and thick smoke billows. The white car speeds away in the dark night, leaving hell behind. The wrecked car is engulfed in thick smoke under the dark bridge. The woman screams, "Stand up, James, we have to go!" as she pulls James's limp body out of the wreckage. "I can't walk," James mutters weakly. She hugs him tightly and says, "Stay with me." But James is fading. "We still have a long way to go," she cries tearfully. Finally, "James." The scream was in vain. James was silent forever in her arms. In the dimly lit emergency room, James sat limply on the floor, with his hands covering his head. The woman beside him was silent, her eyes red. "An old friend of mine from the army is an ER doctor now," James muttered softly. "You almost didn't make it." The words hung in the air. They had survived, but the wounds in their hearts were still wide open. James sat limply, staring at Gwendolyn, who should have been dead. "You're dead," he said. "I've been dead before," she replied coldly. She told him about seeing a body pulled from the Thames, the killer who was sent to die in his place, and the replacement body from the Kingston mortuary. The teeth matched, and the records were perfect. "Why didn't you tell me?" James asked, hurt. "I had to make Myrmidon believe I was dead so I could escape and come back to you." James could only whisper, "Then where did you go?" James woke up from a long faint. Gwendolyn told him, "Mahmoud Nassar died on British soil." An hour later, Myrmidon staged a coup and seized Nassar's capital. The world watched as mercenaries destroyed the country's military. Yesterday, Sebastian Fromm stated that the government's military is obsolete and that war is now purely a private business. Myrmidon offered to cooperate with NATO. NATO remained silent, neither rejecting nor accepting the offer. James inquired about the M3 contacts, and Gwendolyn revealed that they had been completely compromised. Myrmidon leaked old espionage evidence, and MIG accused them of killing Nassar and targeting others. Every 00 agent was ordered to hunt them down and kill them. "Change your clothes quickly. Say goodbye to London." They had to escape now before it was too late. A few months later, it was early morning at the Red Lion pub. James sat alone with a cigarette in hand, staring blankly. An old man enters, orders a drink, and chats casually with the bartender. James mutters softly, "It's too early for scotch." But he drinks it anyway, because if he doesn't start drinking in the morning, he won't be able to stop all day. That's his life now. A few months later, at the Red Lion pub, a friendly bald man named Skip chats with the quiet James. Skip talks about getting lost, working in finance, and waiting for a client. When asked what he's waiting for, James replies coldly, "My business." When Skip asks what he's waiting for, James replies, "If I knew, I wouldn't be waiting." Then he leaves, leaving Skip stunned. A few months later, in a windy city park, a woman sits reading a book when a man approaches her. They have a short conversation about the noisy Red Lion pub. The woman says the book is hard to put down and offers to lend it to him. The man declines politely. They get up, hold hands, and walk away slowly as the wind blows leaves behind them. In the windy park, James lights a cigarette and asks the woman why she looks tense. She said it was nothing. James heard a tone of blame in her voice. He reminded her of his offer to leave MIG. She admitted that she remembered. James said he had been thinking about what she had said. Their lives were not meant for each other. They were where they were supposed to be. She replied softly, "You're right." James and Gwendolyn strolled through the country park. He said he preferred this atmosphere, which was reminiscent of Strauss's Ein Heldenleben. They discuss how the war is over and that now is the time for peace. However, James says that for some people, war is the only thing that suits them. In front of a small house, James is surprised that Gwendolyn has time for poetry and classical music. He was about to continue talking when they both noticed a mysterious envelope on the doormat. Inside the small house, Gwendolyn defends classical art, saying it is timeless and connects people across eras. James said that war suited them better. They entered the house, and Gwendolyn invited James to the library the next morning instead of hanging out at the pub. James agreed, but when they entered the room, a cold voice said, "Door." Something was wrong. Burst open, and James and Gwendolyn were suddenly attacked by a mysterious woman dressed in black. A fierce fight ensued in the small room. Punches and knives flew. Suddenly, the woman shouted, "Wait, and I'm not here to fight." Then she said, "I need your help." She dropped her knife and knelt down. The threat turned into a plea for help. Clark forced his way in, raised his hands, and said he was a former Myrmidon. James and Gwendolyn restrained him. Clark explained that he had found them by tracking Bond's cell phone, MIG contacts, train schedules, and cameras. James said that Waterloo is safe without cameras, but no one can hide forever. Clark replied, "Myrmidon isn't finished. You are needed." Clark explains Myrmidon's nanotechnology. Nanites in the brain for communication, in the skin for toxin resistance, and nanomedicine for superhuman abilities. James says he already knows that. Clark reveals the secret. Everything is controlled by a synthetic virus created by Fromm that never leaves the soldier's blood. The virus is mutating, causing psychosis, seizures, and death. Clark points to his own arm and says, "I know because I'm carrying that virus right now." Clark reveals that Fromm plans to release a second nanotech virus that will paralyze the motor skills, speech, and vehicle control of his opponents. The world will be forced to become its own army. James and Gwendolyn are the only ones immune. Clark asks for help. Suddenly, shots ring out, glass shatters, and chaos erupts in the room. They fire back. Clark yells, "I know who sent them!" Skip breaks down the door and jumps in while firing his revolver. James and Gwendolyn return fire. Skip mocks his nickname, Skip, saying it's just a pub nickname. He says that he left Myrmidon and is now the new 002. "You've made more enemies than Myrmidon," he says with a cold smile. An old friend sends his regards. Skip interrupts again and introduces himself as the new 002. James asks what he means. Mocking the name Skip as just a pub nickname, he asks what Myrmidon told James. Smiling coldly, he pulls out a K-Chak rifle and says, "The world has changed while you weren't looking." Skip shoots fiercely, hitting James in the shoulder. Gwendolyn fires back and Skip runs out of ammunition. He rushes in with his fists, hitting James hard. Gwendolyn yells, "Bitch!" and fires her shotgun at point-blank range. Skip narrowly escapes. The fight becomes more brutal. Surprised to recognize Gwendolyn Gann, Skip says that M is short-handed because she's too young. Gwendolyn replies coldly, "I'm used to it, especially against opponents who are already half dead." A hard kick lands, and Skip staggers. Skip is hit hard, his gun falls, and blood spatters. James grabs his collar and taunts him, "Little ginger twerp." Gwendolyn points her gun at Skip's head. Skip raises his hands in surrender. James says they've got him and asks if Gwendolyn is okay. James is injured, but he still holds the gun to Skip's head. Skip raises his hands. Gwendolyn suspects that he is a 00. Clark threatens him with a knife. James is firm. "We're not killing him, got it?" James holds Skip at gunpoint and says that they won't kill him. Skip taunts James about being short-handed. James asks why they're still being pursued when they're already out of the game. Skip replies, "Fromm wants to punish you for Nassar. You slept with Myrmidon. M fought back, but the paymaster wants From to be happy. Myrmidon controls everything now. James threatens, "If From finds out you're alive, it's over." Skip just grins and says, "You won't last much longer." Skip says that all the 00 MiG6s are still chasing them. James threatens them but says he won't kill them. Skip mocks them for still being targeted. Gwendolyn says they won't meet again. James quipped that if they meet again, it will be as co-workers. Skip warns them about blind spots. Gwendolyn threatens that Skip will die if he's careless. The room is a mess. Skip lies unconscious, blood pooling around him. He slowly wakes up, grimacing in pain. Sitting up, he mutters, "Shit," and holds his head. He picks up his cracked cell phone and calls his boss. His voice is weak. "He's here, sir. Missing Agent From is with him." Skip reports to his superior. From is developing a new virus in Virginia. The missing agent is with the target. At the station, Clark asks about James and Gwendolyn's plans. They say it's none of his business. Gwendolyn boards the train. Clark says goodbye. "See you, James Bond." James lights a cigarette. "I'll wait for the next meeting." James and Gwendolyn escape in a car. James says that Gwendolyn was rude earlier. She replies that it's easier to stick together. They discuss how Clark found them and admitted he's a former Myrmidon. Gwendolyn asks for real equipment. James agrees, but he wants to recruit old people from the last MiG in Rome. In the car, James asks who else they will meet. Gwendolyn replies that it might be 009 and is surprised that Nob found him first. James says that 009 won't hold back. Gwendolyn is annoyed and tells him not to talk about that girl. James interrupts, and Gwendolyn retorts, "If you like her, hit yourself. Don't talk about your ex." She concludes, "I taught you how to play this game." From Washington to Paris to Rio to Venice, various agents and old contacts received the same missed call. Gann was with him. Everyone realized that something big was happening again. The world of espionage was on the move again. At a hotel in Washington, an agent reported by phone, 002 found James and Gann alive. How ironic. Recon predicted that they would go to Rome. The suggestion was to assign 009 to the case. The order is clear. Capture Bond and Gann alive, even if they are not on the same page. All for the king and country. The plane lands in Rome. James sees the Pantheon from the window. Gwendolyn remembers the Curia Pompeia, where Caesar died, and the old bomb maker's building. James asks, "Are you thinking about grand history? Or your personal history here?" Gwendolyn replies, "Martinis at the Black Market Hall." Then she asks James to tell her a serious story. The hitman on the rooftops of Rome thinks about his target's lifestyle and what he'll drink after the kill. He imagines chasing his victim through the alleys. On the plane, James apologizes to Gwendolyn for disagreeing with her. She replies casually, "It's okay. Maybe your way is the best way." At an open cafe in Rome, an old man smiles contentedly when he sees his target appear. James and Gwendolyn enter, and the old man says, "Linus Pendleton, former QMIG, a genius. He's hard to reach, but he always comes to this cafe for the best coffee." Gwendolyn asks to speak with him alone first, and James agrees, asking her to signal him if she senses any danger. Gwendolyn meets Linus Pendleton, the former QMIG. She apologizes for disturbing him and gives him a warm hug. Gwendolyn tells him she is proud of him, and he is touched. She immediately gets down to business. The MIG is in chaos and needs his skills again. Linus smiles, acknowledging that he is still reading and bored and ready to help. James and Gwendolyn meet Linus Pendleton, the former Q of MIG. Linus is surprised but happy. Gwendolyn gives him a warm hug and tells him she is proud of him. They get straight down to business. The MIG is in chaos again and needs his skills. Linus casually replies, "Still reading, still bored, ready to help." James receives a call. "We're being burned. Get out now." The call is cut off. Another voice says that 006 already knows. A sniper scope locks onto a target running in the grass. Your burner is no longer safe, Myrmidon. Scan all cell phones. Your voice is their walkie-talkie. James gets off the plane, realizing he has been monitored since landing. Linus said that all local intelligence reports to him. James told Linus to call Gan so he could return home peacefully. Linus asked James if it was okay with him if Myrmidon and MIG agreed. James replied that feelings didn't matter. Linus explained that Fromm's nanotech was a huge leap forward for the British untouchables. James said that Fromm had killed his own people. Linus admitted that it was a death sentence, a second virus ready to be unleashed on the enemy. James shot behind him while driving and apologized to Skip. Skip panicked and shouted, "Shit! Bond is—" The bullet hit Skip, who recoiled in pain. Return fire hit the car, and James sped away. The Roma Cafe became a shooting range. Gwendolyn yelled at Linus to run. Skip threatens Gwendolyn, telling her not to move. James taunts Skip for using a rock against a nuclear weapon. Skip retorts that James doesn't need to worry anymore. The car is destroyed and Skip yells from the wreckage, "You'll regret choosing the wrong side." James yells into the radio, "All agents and police, Bond is in the courtyard." Skip panics and shoots but hits himself. The car crashes into a cafe table, breaking the glass and causing people to run away in fear. Skip is thrown out and James speeds away. James's car crashes into the cafe. Linus yells, "Get in!" Skip shoots but hits himself. The car is destroyed and Linus is thrown out. James speeds into an alley. The police chase after him, yelling for him to stop. Skip yells in pain, "Miracle's got you, Linus." The car speeds into the alley. Gwendolyn steps on the gas. Shots were fired and Skip panicked. The car crashed into a wall and the glass shattered. Skip shot back. James told him to go to the rat alley. The police chased after them, shouting that they wanted them alive. James's car sped out of the alley, its glass shattered. Skip panicked and hit himself. The car crashed into a wall. James hurried back to the alley. The police chased after them, shouting, "Catch them alive!" James narrowly escaped, but only temporarily. James called Rossi, realizing that he was the one at the end of the gun. Rossi told him to throw the gun away and surrender peacefully. James admits that Rossi had led them into a trap. James asks where Rossi is. Rossi replies, "I like you where you are right now. I won't give you another chance." James's car speeds away from the gunfire. Gwendolyn told Linus to get in quickly and shoot back. Skip was hit and bounced off. James turned into an alley. Gwendolyn promised to meet Linus at Piazza Navona at midnight. Linus said he was bored at the repair shop and ready to help. James realized that Rossi was the sniper and apologized. Rossi told him to throw his gun so that he could be captured safely. James admits that Rossi set them up smoothly. Rossi replies coldly, "I like you in this position right now. I won't give you another chance." James threatens Rossi, saying, "You're lucky you met me. If it had been someone else, you would be dead." Rossi told James to throw his gun so he could be captured safely. James admitted that Rossi had set them up smoothly. Rossi replied, "I like you in this position right now. I won't give you another chance." James realized that Rossi was at the end of the sniper's scope and apologized. Rossi told him to throw his gun so he could be arrested safely. James admits that Rossi had set them up. Rossi replied, "I like you in this position. I won't give you another chance." The night in Piazza Navona in Rome feels lively yet tense. Gwendolyn and Linus wait in the car with alert eyes. James gets out, lights a cigarette, and walks to the center of the square. Linus whispers, "They're coming." The car speeds away from the gunfire. Linus yells, "Get in quickly!" Skip is shot and falls back in pain. James turns into a narrow alley. Gwendolyn promises to meet Linus at Piazza Navona at midnight. Linus says he's bored at the workshop and ready to help. The mutated monster lies on the operating table, running a high fever. The doctor says the virus is out of control and that his heart will stop. Fromm enters and sees the results of the mutation. The monster rose and destroyed the room. Fromm spoke calmly. They had created a future free of ideology where humans held the power of life and death. In 2 years, the technology would be licensed to the US and the war would be over. It was a time to celebrate absolute good for the sake of humanity. The plane landed at Dulles in Washington, D.C., and James, Gwendolyn, and Linus got off. James walked quickly, his eyes scanning the area. They passed through strict immigration. The officers checked them for a long time, but finally let them through. James whispered, "This is a stupid risk." They left the airport alert. The car stopped suddenly. James said Myrmidon was everywhere. Skip mocked, "Brave new world." Gwendolyn was amazed that Linus's prosthetic got through the scanner. James doubted it was worth it, but Gwendolyn insisted that they needed Linus. Skip quipped that if it weren't an important call, he wouldn't have come. James ordered everyone to be quiet. Linus was here. James drove with Felix beside him. Felix apologized for not seeing James for a long time and gave him a spare gun, sarcastically saying that D.C. was a bad place to land. James said that Myrmidon was close to the Department of Defense. Felix respected James for daring to bring him to D.C. amidst a heated situation. James drives. Felix gives him a spare gun and says sarcastically that D.C. is a bad place to land. James said that Myrmidon was close to the Department of Defense. Felix respects James for daring to bring him into the situation. James points his gun at Rossi and calls out, "005." Rossi replies with a cold smile. He says not to believe anything Gann says. Gwendolyn tells James to listen. James stares intently. "I know you think you're right, but I don't believe Gwendolyn is who she claims to be." James stands alone with his gun drawn. He says that he can't trust anyone in this world. Gwendolyn appears from behind him with a gun pressed against his back and greets him coldly. James calls her 005. She says she can't trust anything anymore. James replies that she doesn't know what's going on. Gwendolyn is firm. They want to expose all of Fromm's secrets as a war criminal. James asked if she really wanted to stop him. James accused Gwendolyn of using him again. Gwendolyn replied coldly that his mission wasn't what he thought it was. Gann wanted to take over Myrmidon. James became angry and said that Gwendolyn was the most loyal person he had ever known. Gwendolyn revealed that she was loyal until she found out that the government had reinstated Mahmud Nassar to power. Gann had been undercover in Myrmidon, had Fromm's complete trust, and knew all the secrets of the tomb. He stole technology for Britain and its allies. However, when he found out that the government had reinstated Nassar, his faith was shattered. He didn't want to hand over the technology. He had brought Nassar to Fromm in the first place. He only came out of hiding when James tried to save Nassar, which he hadn't predicted. James asked directly, "Are you saying Gann killed Nassar?" Gwendolyn replied that it wasn't certain, but that Gann still had many supporters in Myrmidon and that Fromm was weakening. Gann had recruited half of the troops, making him the strongest candidate to replace Fromm. James was skeptical and unwilling to take her word for it. Gwendolyn insisted, "We'll look for evidence together." James finally agreed. James said that Myrmidon isn't popular among his people. Felix replies that he can only turn a blind eye if the device is installed inside Myrmidon within a 20-yard radius of the server. A small glowing box is thrown to James. Felix says the agency won't help, but he doesn't mind. James asks if he has to take the device to the Fromm facility. Felix grins and says, "You're in love with danger. Spies don't need bombs or lasers anymore." James drives while Felix sarcastically says that DC is ugly and gives him a spare gun. James says that Myrmidon is near the Department of Defense. Felix respects James for daring to bring him into such a dangerous situation. James is alone on the balcony when his phone rings with an unknown number. He answers. Clark's voice is panicked. "I'm being burned by Myrmidon. I need help." Gunshots ring out. James asks who it is. Clark shouts his identity and immediately sends his location. A map appears with a blinking red dot. "Help!" The police chase after him, shouting, "Stop!" Clark jumps onto a car and shoots at James. Bullets fly. James dodges. Clark lands on the hood and shoots again. James steps on the gas and flees. Clark yells, "He's heading north to Mason. Let's catch him." Clark kicks his opponent hard and shoots twice while running. The police yell out, "We've got him!" Clark jumps onto the car and shoots out the window. Return fire hits the police. Clark yells, "Head north toward Mason," while continuing to shoot. James escapes and Clark loses track of him. 10. Clark kicks his opponent hard and shoots twice while running. The police yell, "Got him!" Clark jumps onto the car and shoots out the window. Shots are returned and the police are hit. Clark yells at the target to head north on Mason while continuing to shoot. James escapes and Clark loses track of him. Skip flies after being kicked hard. He yells that he wants to kill James and curses. James shoots back while rolling. Skip falls and rolls on the asphalt. He gets up halfway and says that James looks like Rook, who hates James. Clark kicks James hard, causing him to stagger and bleed. Clark shoots twice as James falls. The police shout, "Got him!" Clark jumps into the car and shoots out the window. Return fire hits the police. Clark yells at the target north of Mason while continuing to shoot. James escapes and Clark loses track of him. Night in London. MI6. M orders them to find another agent. Moneypenny enters to report 007 was seen in Washington, D.C. M is angry. He interfered with the capture of Myrmidon. Now, he is being hunted. M stares at the city at night and says, "Washington, damn it." He orders Moneypenny to contact 009 immediately because if Bond does what is suspected, the situation will be chaotic. James and Felix are in the car. Felix apologizes for not having seen each other in a long time and gives James a spare gun, sarcastically saying that DC is a bad place to land. James says that Myrmidon is near the Department of Defense. Felix respects James for daring to bring him into such a dangerous situation. Clark says he sees the distance between James and Gwendolyn. James replies that he hopes it won't complicate things. Gwendolyn says only one word, complicated. James says that if they are discovered, the plan will be ruined and they will have to find another way. Gwendolyn installs the technology on the target to be checked tomorrow morning. James tells her to rest so her stitches can heal and that they will meet again in the morning. Gwendolyn repeats, "Tomorrow morning?" James closes the door quietly. He walks quickly while calling Felix. Clark is back and Myrmidon is after him too. They knew we were coming, so we needed another way in. Felix said the timing was strange and that the CIA wanted to join the team to retrieve the Myrmidon server cloning drive. James asked if Felix could be trusted. Felix replied that he didn't trust anyone, but that there was no choice. James opened the door slowly and said, "I know, I don't want to get caught again." James said Myrmidon was everywhere. Skip mocked, "Brave New World." Gwendolyn was amazed that Linus's prosthetic passed the scanner. James doubted it was worth it, but Gwendolyn insisted that they needed Linus. Skip quipped that he wouldn't have come if it weren't an important call. James ordered everyone to be quiet. Linus was here. James called Felix. "Clark is back. The Myrmidons are after him too. They know we're coming. We need another way in." Felix said the timing was strange. The CIA wanted to join the team to retrieve the Myrmidon cloning server drive. James asked if Felix could be trusted. Felix replies that he doesn't trust anyone, but there is no choice. James slowly opens the door. "I know, I don't want to get caught again." James realizes that Rossi was at the sniper's end and apologizes. Rossi tells him to throw his gun so that he can be captured safely. James admits that Rossi set them up smoothly. James asks about Rossi's position. Rossi replies coldly, "I like you there right now. I won't give you another chance." In the dark room, 009 stares at the mirror and whispers to himself, "It's time to earn a fearsome reputation." He points the gun at the bed and says coldly, "Kill them both." Then he whispers, "I'm sorry about this." In the dark room, Gwendolyn sat on top of the wounded James Bond. She gently touched his chest, then whispered, "Front eyes, Commander Bond." James asked how he could keep her attention. Gwendolyn moved very close to him, their breaths mingling, and told him not to stop. The door burst open and Skip shot into the room. Gwendolyn was thrown back and began to bleed. James jumped up and grabbed his gun. Skip shot again. James fired back from the floor. Skip staggered and fell, dead. James stood up, breathing heavily and staring coldly at Skip's body. The door burst open, and Skip fired into the room. Gwendolyn was thrown back and began to bleed. James jumped up to grab his gun, and Skip shot again. James fired back from the floor. Skip staggered and fell, dead. James stood up, breathing heavily and staring coldly at Skip's body. Skip kicked James repeatedly, drawing blood, and shouted that he wanted to kill him. James rolled away to avoid the vicious blows. Skip advanced threateningly, saying that James was like the hated rook. James fired back, and Skip staggered, hit. Skip flew after being kicked hard, yelling that he wanted to kill James and cursing him. James fired back fiercely while rolling. Skip falls and rolls on the asphalt. He gets up halfway and says that James is like the hated rook. James stands coldly, his gun still smoking. Clark kicked James hard until he bled, then shot him twice as he fell. The police shouted, "Got him!" Clark jumped into the car and shattered the broken glass. The police returned fire and hit Clark. While continuing to shoot, Clark shouted that the target was north of Mason. James escaped, and Clark lost track of him. 2 days later, James waited alone in an underground tunnel in Washington, D.C., cigarette lit. When Gwendolyn asked about his arm, James replied that it hurt, but that it was no problem because everyone had gathered. Felix appeared, saying he had just arrived. James jokingly asked if Felix would be angry if he asked for a cigarette. 2 days later, in an underground tunnel in Washington, D.C., James waited alone with a lit cigarette. Gwendolyn asked about his arm. He said it hurt, but it wasn't a problem because everyone had gathered. Felix appeared, saying he had just arrived. James jokingly asked Felix if he would be angry if he asked for a cigarette. Gwendolyn said she hadn't expected them to come back here. James and Gwendolyn walked through the dark tunnel. James asked Gwendolyn to read her new poem. She said she hadn't been writing lately. James asked if she missed Suffolk House before Clark arrived. Gwendolyn replied that she had hated it because it was too quiet, and she had no control. However, she was glad they had escaped. They are not the type to live passively like ordinary passengers. At a cafe in Rome, Gwendolyn meets Linus Pendleton, a former QMIG. Linus is surprised but happy to see her. She gives him a warm hug and tells him she's proud of him. She gets straight to the point. The MIG is in chaos and needs his skills again. Linus smiles. He's still reading and still bored. He's ready to help. Myrmidon HQ at night. Clark is dead, and 009 and Fromm are in pursuit. Contact with Gann is lost. A new way in is needed. The easiest way was via the employee shuttle, which came every 30 minutes. Linus could make a keycard and a prosthetic face. Gann left instructions for 009. Behind it all, they had something. James parachuted into Virginia at night and went straight to Myrmidon HQ. He knew their security depended on Department of Defense, DoD, satellites, and contractors. Within the Department of Defense, there are those who secretly want this mission to succeed. Felix was asked to fly the team to the edge of Myrmidon's airspace. Their satellites must be blinded for 30 minutes. Linus is asked if he can build a device that will short-circuit the exhaust fan without tripping the breaker. He replies that if he can't, then he's useless. James says it's brilliant, and they proceed. Linus created special ammunition that overloads the electronic systems of the Myrmidons, including their neural enhancements. One shot was enough to crash the entire network if it hit one person. They knew there was a problem, but didn't know our position until they saw their friends die. By then, we had already taken their access chips. The room was destroyed. Skip was lying unconscious, blood pooling around him. He woke up, grimacing as he sat up and held his head. He picked up his cracked cell phone and called his boss. His voice was weak. "He's here, sir. Missing Agent Fromm is with him." James drove while Felix gave him a spare gun and sarcastically told DC to land. James said the Myrmidons were near the Department of Defense. Felix respected James for daring to bring him into such a dangerous situation. James entered the dark room with his gun pointed at Fromm. From the start, James said, Fromm wouldn't believe who else was with him. Fromm raised his hands with a cold smile, knowing that James had come to stop the war that Fromm had started. James was firm. One person was enough if the shots were accurate. James jumped out of the car while shooting and apologized to Skip. Skip panicked and screamed, but he was hit too. Skip was thrown hard. James sped into a rat alley. The police chase after him, shouting that they want him alive. James narrowly escaped, but only temporarily. He enters a dark room, points his gun at From, and says that he is in his private room. From sits calmly and asks if James thinks he can stop him. James replies that he wants to end the war before it starts. From taunts James, saying he's just one man. James retorts, "One man is enough if the bullets are accurate." James enters a dark room and points his gun at From. From sits calmly and asks if James thinks he can stop him. James replies that he wants to end the war before it starts. From taunts James, saying he's just one man. James retorts, "One man is enough if the bullets are accurate." James says he can't trust anyone in this world. Gwendolyn appeared from behind with her gun drawn and greeted him coldly. James called her 005. She said she couldn't trust anything anymore. James replied that she didn't know what was going on. Gwendolyn was firm. They wanted to expose all of From's secrets as a war criminal. James asked if she really wanted to stop him. Clark kicked James repeatedly until he bled, then shot him twice as he fell. The police shouted, "Got him!" Clark jumped into the car and shattered the window with a shot. The police returned fire and hit Clark. Clark shouted for the target to head north toward Mason while continuing to shoot. James escaped, and Clark lost track of him. In the dark foyer of a building full of secrets, two figures collided in a burst of burning rage. A woman in blue, like a vengeful ghost, launched a deadly kick, woof, hitting her enemy in the chest and sending him flying. She retaliated with a hellish punch, "Fwah wump!" shouting about From's little statue, the heroic faceless doctor, and who killed that crazy tyrant king. The PAP kick echoes, blood drips, and bones creak. They mercilessly destroy each other with blurred punches, gasping breaths, and eyes full of vengeance. Finally, one fell to his knees, revealing the darkest secret. He convinced himself that he was the doctor. James, the guy in purple, was thrown violently, his body shattered by the fierce girl's kicks and punches. Shh! Whiff! Pap! The sound of impact echoed, and blood almost spilled. Amidst the chaos, she stopped and said coldly, "But he was a tyrant all along." Then came the heartbreaking moment. "You've gotten better, James. I'm proud of you." James replied with a counterpunch. "Learned from the best, didn't I?" They destroyed each other, knives flying, fists colliding, and words full of regret. "At least you were then." It started with a brutal hand crush. Crash! Blood spurted, screams of pain. Then Gwen rushed into the upper corridor and shouted into the radio, "Hurry up!" But she received a cold retort. "You've lost your way, Gwen, just like From did." James and Gwen stared at each other in the dark room, breathing heavily. James made an emotional confession. "At least I have the good sense not to fight alone anymore." Suddenly, James Bond was on his knees with his hands behind his head. The enemy shouted, "James Bond is on the ground." Shots rang out. "Birdrock!" Gwen ran forward, shouting, "Ah, down! Damn it!" James shot while running. "Baraka!" Bullets flew, blood splattered, and enemies screamed in pain. In the control room, Linus and the team panic. "Bond, what the hell is going on in there?" It turns out that Gan, a trusted ally, has turned on them. He has staged a coup and taken complete control of Myrmidon. James realizes that they have all been used. He yells into the radio, "She's taking control as we speak." Linus is in shock. "Miss Gan, she wouldn't..." But it's too late. James is sent to Blackhawk for a rooftop evacuation, but he is trapped in From's room. The door is locked in emergency mode. James is coughing up blood and shouting, "I need a way out before..." Boom! The door's blown open amid total chaos. This is a God-level betrayal. Hope is almost extinguished, and James Bond is on the edge again, alone against everything. James crawls toward From, who is lying in a pool of blood. James apologizes for the girl, but From still has time to reveal the most terrifying secret before he dies. The nanotech virus he was carrying isn't just a cure. It creates a global neural network. It connects a squad, makes them a hive mind, a single global network. Soldiers anywhere using Myrmidon technology would automatically be loyal to From, directly controllable to invade countries and overthrow governments without their knowledge. Boom! The explosion echoed. Troops entered, bullets flew. James was alone against everything, blood dripping. This is no longer Bond versus ordinary villains. It's a new threat of world war and mass mind control. From was almost successful. Another explosion echoes. James yells, "Hit it again!" as blood drips. He orders the team to destroy the last server so that From's global network is shut down. From lies dying on the floor, whispering his last words. One global network of soldiers following all of From's orders. Access is only possible from his workstation. If the server dies, Myrmidon will become a driverless car, but only temporarily. James immediately contacts Felix. "You got all that?" Felix replied coldly, "Gan took both clone servers I gave you." In the control room, Linus was shocked. "Both? They're coming in." The enemy was approaching, the backup servers were gone, and the hive mind network was still alive. James was alone in the destroyed room. From was dead at his feet. The world was on the brink of destruction. James pressed the radio and said, "Wish me luck!" He was jumping into the final battle. The enemy troops advanced, shouting, "Get on the ground, hands behind your head, and get his earpiece." They surrounded the target, weapons drawn and ready to execute. James lay bleeding. The Myrmidon troops lifted his body, shouting, "Bond's clean! He's been hit! And the other one's dead." Gan appeared, giving his final report. "Director, From's loyalists are all in custody. We have full control of the facility." From total chaos to absolute victory. But James was still alive, and his gaze said this wasn't the end. James was badly injured. He knelt in the middle of a giant room surrounded by bald, implanted Myrmidon troops. Gan stood in front of him, his voice soft yet powerful. "You're wounded, James. Please don't fight anymore. I want you alive to see the shape of things to come." In the middle of the room stood Sebastian From's statue, majestic like a new god, with red light shining on the neatly lined up troops. Gan explained slowly. "When the Myrmidons found you, most of you had been used up and cast aside by your own governments. From saw value in you and offered to put you back together, better." Then he admitted, "The enhancements came with a cost. From lost sight of the purpose, but I haven't." The army stared coldly at James, their implants glowing faintly. James stood there, his gaze full of anger and confusion. He was being forced to see the future they had created. In his heart, he knew this was not the end he wanted. Gan stood in front of the severely injured James, surrounded by a team of bald Myrmidons with implants. The magnificent statue of From stood behind Gan like a silent witness. Gan spoke softly but confidently. "I know what it means to be cast aside. Put your faith in me tonight and I won't forget it. Tomorrow, Myrmidon will be contracted by the USDOD, and from there, we will change the world." James replied sarcastically, "Why bother with this show? Just kill me." Gan replied coldly, "I didn't bring you here to execute you. I want you to join me. Make Myrmidon what it should have been." Then, an emotional flashback. "Years ago, I met a talented agent losing his faith. You remind me why we fight." The troops held James tightly, but Gan held his cheek close and whispered, "Trust me again, won't you?" James stared into Gan's eyes for a long time, his breath catching. Amidst betrayal, blood, and visions of a new world, he was at the biggest crossroads of his life. James shouted, "Fire! Fire!" as he fired relentlessly. The Myrmidon troops advanced fiercely, bullets flew and fire engulfed the server. Gan stood coldly in the middle of the chaos. "We can't be trusted either," James shouted back. "No, Gan!" He jumped out of the way, firing back, and revealed the trap. "I planted a remote detonator just before your men broke in." Gan was shocked. "What did you do?" James grinned. "When 004 told me you'd double-cross me, I laughed in her face." Shots rang out. Troops fell one by one. Felix said into the radio, "Both clone servers, huh?" In the end, amid the fire and smoke, James and Gan stared at each other. Blood, betrayal, and trust shattered. Heavy rain poured down on the dark night. Gan screamed in pain as he ran. "You don't know what you've done." The Myrmidon troops advanced fiercely, brak-kak-kak-kak-kak-kak, with endless gunfire and lightning strikes. Fire blazed from the muzzles of their weapons. James fired back while jumping out of the way. He continued to yell, "Drop it!" while protecting the badly wounded Gan. Amidst the chaos, they stared at each other. James's gun fell into a puddle with a clack, and the rain continued to fall, mixed with blood. Gan stared at James with eyes full of anger, sadness, and regret. This wasn't just a shootout. It was the end of trust and the beginning of betrayal. Their bond had been severely damaged. James and Gan were on the verge of total destruction, and the rain seemed to cry for them both. James and Gwendolyn stare at each other in the middle of the storm. James holds a gun, and Gwendolyn is soaked in a mixture of blood and tears. Gwendolyn whispered softly, "I woke from a dream last night. I dreamt we were back in Suffolk." James remained silent, but his eyes were full of memories. Gwendolyn raised her weapon, clack, and said, "Go on, I'll take care of them." James stares at her firmly. "We're no more righteous than they are, Gwen, not even you." Gwendolyn turns and walks slowly away in the rain, her back heavy with burden. James stood and watched her go, whispering, "It's up to you now, to make sure they never use it." Lightning flashed, and small fires lit up the ruins. Two people who once trusted each other were now separated in the storm. The city, usually bright with lights, was now engulfed in fierce flames. The tall buildings of Myrmidon were burning fiercely. The large red M logo on the roof was still lit, but it was surrounded by flames and thick black smoke that covered the sky. A black helicopter glided low over the chaos, its blades spinning fast. The light of the fire illuminated its dark body. Smoke rose high, almost touching the rotors. This helicopter looked like it was escaping a newly created hell. A text appeared. "The Americans raided Myrmidon yesterday." Yesterday, American forces attacked the Myrmidon headquarters, and now the city was in ruins. The fires were still burning, and the smoke formed a huge black cloud. This helicopter was probably carrying those who had escaped. 5 days after the chaos, we returned to the MIG building in London. The sky is cloudy, and the atmosphere is cold and heavy. In the upstairs meeting room, a senior official sits holding a report. They received a tip that Myrmidon was misusing access to government secrets. Equipment is missing or sabotaged, but they are recovering what they can. A former agent awaiting reinstatement sits tense in front of him, her hands clenched tightly. The man continued, "Your reinstatement at MIG is still pending on the Foreign Secretary's desk." However, there was one thing that made him hesitate. The Americans gave us full access to From's servers, but there was almost no information about the neural network our military is so keen on. A miniature model of London Bridge stood beautifully on the table, but the symbolism was clear. The bridge of trust was fragile, big secrets were still hidden, and the fate of these agents, the military, and perhaps the world, rested on the next decision. We returned to the MIG meeting room in London. The sky is cloudy and the atmosphere is cold and heavy. A senior official sat holding a report. They received a tip that Myrmidon was misusing access to government secrets. Equipment was missing or sabotaged, but they were recovering what they could. The young woman in front of him, a former agent awaiting reinstatement, sat tense with her hands clenched. The man continued, "Your reinstatement at MIG is still pending on the Foreign Secretary's desk." However, there is one thing making him hesitate. The Americans gave us full access to From's servers, but there's almost no information about the neural network our military really wants. A miniature model of London Bridge stood beautifully on the table, but the symbol was clear. The bridge of trust was fragile, and big secrets were still hidden. The man looks intently at the woman. "We should be less concerned with where From's research is, and more concerned with what we'll do if it turns up. The woman replied softly, "Sir." Another big decision awaited them: redemption, lost trust, and the threat of a neural network that could change everything. James Bond finally returned to M headquarters in London. The door opened and sunlight streamed in. Moneypenny greeted him warmly, saying, "Welcome back, James. We've all missed you around here." James smiled slightly. Who has exactly?" Moneypenny chuckled softly. "Well, I have, anyway." The atmosphere lightened for a moment, like coming home after a long war. But then Moneypenny picked up an envelope. "Oh, I almost forgot. A letter arrived for you the other day. It was addressed to M's office by mistake." "From a Miss Strauss in Suffolk?" James raises his eyebrows and stares at the envelope for a long time. "Ring a bell?" Moneypenny asks with a sly smile. James holds the envelope gently, his eyes cold but full of questions. Memories of Suffolk, old people, and secrets that might resurface. The warm welcome turned into slow tension. This was not just a letter, it was possibly the key to everything happening. James Bond stepped off the roof of the M building in London. His blue suit fluttered in the cold wind as he walked slowly. He lit a cigarette and inhaled deeply. Smoke billowed, mingling with his heavy breath. His eyes stared at the city, still shrouded in haze. His mind spun with questions. Then he lifted the brown envelope from Moneypenny. "Miss Strauss in Suffolk." He stared at the envelope for a long time, his fingers trembling slightly, and the cigarette in his mouth nearly finished. A drizzle began to fall, water dripping onto his face. He didn't move, just stared at the envelope with blue eyes full of anger, sadness, and regret. The past was knocking on the door again, and James knew that if he opened the envelope, he would return to Suffolk and the buried memories. But he also knew he couldn't ignore it. The rain grew heavier. The city darkened. And James Bond was alone on the roof with a dead cigarette and an envelope that could change everything. James stared at the envelope a little longer. His blue eyes looked darker now, filled with a mixture of anger, sadness, and regret. The cigarette in his mouth had become just a butt. The last of the smoke curled slowly before dying out. He didn't open it right away. He just held it tightly, his fingers turning white from the pressure. The city behind him began to darken as the lights of the buildings turned on one by one. Yet he was alone in a changing world. James Bond was at a crossroads. Opening the envelope meant returning to Suffolk and the buried memories, or ignoring it and continuing with life as usual. But we know James, he can never ignore the past. The drizzle intensified, water dripping onto his coat, but he didn't move. He just stared at the envelope, and we knew this story wasn't over yet. It was a cold night on the roof of a tall London building. A light drizzle fell. James Bond stood alone, his blue suit wet, a cigarette between his lips glowing faintly red. He opened the brown envelope from Moneypenny, Miss Strauss in Suffolk, and slowly read the poem inside. "I buried my heart in a coffin of earth. It was wrapped in a banner of red and blue." He took a deep drag on his cigarette, the smoke mingling with his heavy breathing. He continued reading. "I've carried it ever through winter and war, through battles on many a faraway shore, to remind me of one who was true." His eyes glistened for a moment. Rain mixed with tears and fell onto the paper. James stared at the city, still hazy in the distance. The cigarette slowly died on his lips. This was no longer about missions or enemies. It was about the heart he had buried in Suffolk, and the memories he had carried through war and betrayal. Now, they were hurting him again, at the worst possible moment. James Bond was completely alone on the roof, with a poem that read, "You can't run from what you once loved." A light drizzle fell again as Gwendolyn sped away on her motorcycle, her red hair flying wildly and her blue eyes full of burden. She whispered a poem softly in the roar of the wind. "Though battered and broken, I carry it still. Its once brilliant standard now stained by the sea." James followed behind on his roaring motorcycle, staring at Gwendolyn's back without a word. The poem continued, "Now ashen and bloody, all color is gone. Yet the echoes of virtue and glory ring on. They sped along the winding road, the light from their motorcycles piercing the fog and lightning flashing in the distance. Gwendolyn concluded, "In the hearts of old soldiers like me." As the sun rose faintly on the horizon and the rain subsided, they disappeared around the bend. Two broken people who had survived, carrying memories of Suffolk and an unfinished poem.